Hello. Thank you for taking a moment to learn more about the resource needs of fine arts undergraduate students concentrating in the visual arts. Those who are most often in need of help in academic libraries are undergraduate students. Learning how to conduct academic research in this setting for the first time can often be daunting for these students, but research librarians know how to help them learn the tools they need to succeed in finding resources. Fine arts majors can be helped if they know what they are looking for as well, but when a project is creative rather than analytical, their needs are not always apparent. Helping these students fully utilize the academic library can be a challenge for information professionals when systems and training are constructed around analytical searching rather than inspiration seeking. So why visual arts students? For starters, these students should be handled by librarians differently because of their unique research needs. Not only is every project individualized, but what will inspire them is as well. Because of this, students often don't seek factual information, but rather inspirational information like images, creative writing, and artists' essays. Students do not use the same strategies for creative projects when searching, since they aren't always entirely sure what they are looking for. Instead, they utilize different tactics like browsing, which will be discussed later in this presentation. While it is not always the case, because academic libraries serve such a large number of users in many disciplines, the arts student is often not considered when thinking of ways to enhance resources or practices for student searchers. So who are visual arts majors? While there is little data available about the demographics of this population on a national scale, according to survey data released in 2013 by the National Center for Education Statistics, between 2011 and 2012, there were around 6,800 students awarded bachelor's degrees for the visual arts, of which more were female. This is only accounting for graduates, meaning the number of active students who are first-year undergraduates and above are far higher. There is little data about the average age and race of this group. However, the current population survey gathers data from undergraduates in general. According to the data from their 2014 survey, approximately 45% of the roughly 1,500 enrolled undergraduate students interviewed were between 20 and 24 years old. Based on a 2014 report from the Pew Research Center, this age group is considered members of the millennial generation. This is an important trait to keep in mind because these are digital natives, meaning they are used to technology and expect expedient results. The Pew report also found that millennials are, quote, the most racially diverse generation in American history, end quote. Based on the data from the survey, though, enrolled undergraduate students are still predominantly white, making up about 57% of surveyed participants. So how do students seek inspiration, and what have been found to be the needs of the population? The primary way student searchers seek information is by browsing. This term summarizes the findings on their information behaviors by academics, but it is vague at first glance. Polly Frank conducted an earlier study of this population in 1999 through focus groups. She coined the phrase foot in the door search strategy in her results, explaining that students often use a cataloging system to locate one source they think will be relevant, find it in the stacks, and then browse around that item for other inspirational materials they don't feel they will find in the database alone. Many of the other studies also describe the ways inspirational information is gathered outside of the library. William Hemig describes browsing in an abstract sense, suggesting browsing occurs at any time through, quote, passive information acquisition, end quote. This is done through actions like observing their environment, searching the library, or roaming the internet. All studies emphasize that inspiration can come from anywhere for these students, but no matter where it comes from, it is a form of browsing. How, then, can a librarian determine the needs of these students when their behavior is based on a style of serendipity? Well, despite the unique inspirational needs of these students, there are shared needs that were discovered through various studies. Hemig suggested that there were 4 primary information uses for the professional artists he surveyed: inspiration, visual elements, knowledge of materials and techniques, and career guidance. These findings cover most of the needs of student artists as well. However, the list leaves out a need Frank emphasized, which was information about the contemporary art climate. Let's use a quick example to explain all of these needs. A figurative artist who specializes in portraits may find inspiration through headshot photographs. After finding that inspiration, they need visual elements to inform their piece, or in this case, visual reference materials to create their piece. They may want to experiment with a new material or technique they've never tried, at which time they would seek information on those subjects. Finally, their work is done, but now they don't know how to show it in galleries or submit it to exhibitions, at which time they would research career guidance. All the while, they should be aware of what is happening in the art world while they are contributing to it, so keeping up to date on contemporary art and which galleries are showing pieces like theirs is vital to using that career guidance successfully. You may have noticed a sticky situation in this example. They are seeking inspiration through images and then making art with visual element materials. Is that considered an infringement on copyright? As with most ethical concerns, the answer is not always clear. A famous example of this dilemma occurred in 2009 over the iconic Hope poster featuring an image of Obama. When the artist was sued by the owners of the reference image for infringing on their copyrights, the case settled, but it is an instance of art and copyright colliding for a fairly nasty ordeal. Students should be made aware of examples like this one in order to better understand the seriousness of choosing to use reference materials they just pluck from the internet without consideration. Additionally, many art students are not aware of how copyright applies to their own creative works. This is something they should be trained on while in school in order to protect their rights once they begin exhibiting in galleries and selling work to patrons and collectors. Now that we understand the students' behaviors, needs, and some considerations to keep in mind, the questions become, what resources would be best for this group, and how can we find them? First, selecting databases. For this search, I selected two highly relevant databases to art, the Art Index and Art Bibliographies, in order to search for resource materials. Other databases were considered, but some seemed more useful to the student than to me as a guide maker. Those databases are included in the resource guide. Once the databases were selected, facets of the search were identified. Considering the 5 information needs of artists based on the current research, which were inspiration, visual elements, knowledge of materials and techniques, career guidance, and contemporary art, I determined that inspiration, visual elements, and materials or techniques were not viable for searching without the context of a single student's project. Turning the attention then to career guidance and contemporary art, the facets art, contemporary, and career were selected. With these facets in mind, it was determined that the can't live without this facet first strategy would be most useful, with the term art leading each search. To enhance the initial search for contemporary art resources, the building block strategy was also used, whereby a Boolean phrase was created using a thesaurus provided by the Art Index. The results were placed in 3 general categories: inspirational browsing, contemporary art, and career guidance. All resources were assessed based on the longevity and reputation of the associated publication, as well as the resource's browsability. Inspirational browsing was created as a category for any resource that could help students seek inspiration through images. Of the 3 listed here, ArtStore is the most recommended if an institution has a subscription, because it collects images from museums, galleries, and artists globally, and includes detailed copyright information. Many students of this community have emphasized the request for information about the contemporary art world, and so emphasis was placed on these resources for this guide. Considering that most of these students are digital natives who want fast information, many of these listings were also assessed for their social media presence. It allows for passive information seeking, which could prove very useful to millennials. By far, the most difficult resource to gather were those with career advice. However, this need is extremely important as it helps students transition into the role of professional artists. And The Business of Being an Artist by Daniel Grant is more than likely the most beneficial to students, as its topics are far-reaching and highly relevant. After gathering all of these resources and creating this guide for students, I turned to the question, how else can we address their needs? The biggest drawback of the current research was the small sample sizes of the studies. Many only evaluated the needs of a handful of practicing artists, while the largest was only a statewide survey of students. While it is a daunting task, I would recommend a collaborative, nationwide survey of this community conducted via email questionnaires. Because of its size, most of the questions would be standardized, but many would offer a dialog box for longer or more unique responses. For distribution, it is recommended that existing organizations with accredited art institutions as members be contacted for their lists, an example being the College Art Association. Once a list of potential institutions is acquired, a master list of contacts should be created to reach out to their associated librarian. Those librarians would be asked to distribute a link to the survey to undergraduate fine arts majors in their institutions. The questions would be based upon the 5 categories of need we have discussed, and those sections would fall after a demographics section was responded to, since there is a lack of data for this population currently. The leading question for each of the 5 categories would be the same. Through what media do you seek blank? They would then be given options like online, or at the library, or through social media, etc. It would be multiple selection style, so they could check all applicable boxes. A text box would be provided after any question with an other category, prompting students to expand on that response if desired. Each question would be followed by inquiries specific to that category, but the main goal is to uncover how this population as a whole seeks inspiration for each of the needs well established by the research. There would not be a sole focus on libraries, but questions would be included to explore what their library does to provide for these needs, as well as what the students would like to see done by their library. All of this would help libraries nationally improve their services to this community of unique searchers who don't generally fit into the same boxes as other undergraduates. Which seems fitting for a group of visual artists who translate the world and their experiences in different ways than purely academic users do. I hope you found information in this presentation useful and encourage you to send me any questions you may have. Thank you so much for taking the time to learn more about undergraduate fine arts majors concentrating in the visual arts and their information needs and behaviors.